Hey guys, Joshua Vidovic from Vidovic Arts here, and today we're working on this Nurgle snail. So this model was actually completely hand-created, and if you want to sculpt one of these yourselves, all you got to do is follow the instructions or this little tutorial ahead, and hopefully you can create something like this. It really does come down to, as always, the paint job, so make sure you have some good paints from Games Workshop, because they are definitely the best paints that I use, and I couldn't make this without them. So let's get into the actual make. So I initially started this build thinking maybe I could 3D print the shell, but I decided that I wanted to go full natural, as in I wanted to have it either recycled parts or sculpted, hand sculpted myself. So instead I looked at a $2 shop that's just down the road from where I live, and I bought a bag of shells, like seashells, and it only cost $3.50. So that's pretty damn good, and there just happened to be the perfect shell in there, but I definitely could have used a bunch of different shells if I wanted to. So yeah, I chose the nicest looking shell, and then after that I pretty much got straight into the warbler creating, and that's basically the thermoplastic, which is we heat up a sheet of this stuff and it's really malleable, and when it cools down it gets really hard, and it's pretty damn sturdy. I like to use this for a lot of my underneath the models, just to make sure that if this thing does happen to drop or be handled in any way, it won't collapse under itself. I actually pre-made some shapes using some aluminium and warbler in a previous video where I made the Nurgle maggots. So I had these on standby, which was really awesome. So it's always good to have an excess of stuff. If you're in the mood to just work on things, make more than you need, because you'll definitely be able to find a reason to use it later on. So next up we use the Epoxy Sculpt, and that's basically the two-part modeling compound where you mix two parts together, and given enough time, it'll set and it'll get really hard. Kind of like green stuff, but a little bit more sturdy. But you can definitely use green stuff if you don't have any of this on standby. So yeah, I just find this is actually a lot more softer when it's put together, and less sticky. So green stuff definitely works. It's probably cheaper as well, to be honest. I tend to use green stuff for more smaller sculpts instead of these rather large things. Like, I definitely wouldn't be making this guy out of green stuff. It's too much. It would cost way too much. And yeah, I wouldn't want to work with that much green stuff on in one go. Definitely not. Now, I used a couple of modeling tools when I put this guy together, and if you don't happen to have any on hand, you can use things like your fingers, for starters. The ends of paint brushes are really good for poking around. Make sure when you're using Epoxy Sculpt and green stuff, you wet the end of whatever tool you're using so it doesn't stick. If you use too much water, it'll end up ruining the model, but these things, they tend to get really sticky the more you handle them, and the hotter they get more sticky as well. So using water actually allows you to sculpt on top of things without pulling or tearing apart the model. That's actually really handy, and I don't think I would be able to sculpt this without using just a tiny bit of water. You just pretty much use paint water if you want to. But yeah, use a paintbrush, your fingers, you could use a pen tip. You could use a scalpel knife if you don't have sculpting tools. Otherwise, you could just go to a $2 shop or a hardware store or something like that, or create a craft shop of some sort, and they definitely have like the clay sculpting tools, the ones that are made out of wood. They're usually rather cheap, so if you get some from there, you'd be able to find something good, and you work your way around from that. You pretty much just use whatever you have on hand and whatever you feel comfortable with. So I was trying to make this as close to the official snail, or the Nurgle snail from Warhammer. So I decided I wasn't just going to make him a plain old snail. I wanted to make him with the feet, like they have it in the actual model. So I needed to make the feet themselves, and I pretty much used warbler because I decided this on the go, and if I had made this initially, I would have made the feet first and foremost, before I mixed up anything, because I could actually sculpt all the feet properly and attach them afterwards, and I wouldn't have to sculpt in those grooves like I did. And I'd be able to just push them in and have it look perfect. But I did it the other way around, so I didn't end up making the feet look exactly the same as the model in Games Workshop version. Instead, I made them kind of look like teeth, They look very much like teeth in the end, which is cool because Nurgle, I mean, God, Nurgle, yeah, you could make anything out of anything in that. So yeah, the guy's feet, I ended up pushing into those grooves, and then I got the eyes I also made while I was making the feet. And they were just pretty much little noodles of warbler with a little ball on the top, and the ball was the eyeball. And yeah, they came out pretty good. So I made sure I had spaces for these parts to go into, and like the eyes, I had sockets, and with I'm not even sure what those things are, the feelers. Mine kind of look more like tusks, but they are meant to be the feelers of a snail. You know how the snail's got like eyes and thing like that. Yeah, mine look like tusks, but they're pretty much the exact same as the eyeballs, except without the eyeball. Once they're all in place, I was quite happy with it, so I moved on to the actual shell. Now, the shell is much larger than the body with this particular shell. If I'd chosen a smaller shell, I'm sure I could have worked around this, but I had to kind of fill in a lot of the holes. So when I put the shell onto the body, I noticed the gaps where the actual snail would go into were really exposed, so I decided to fill those gaps with more epoxy. That enabled me to make it look even grosser in a way, because the slug it's kind of attached, but I got to sculpt more of a stretched look into it, so it looked like it was like suctioned on, and it is actually quite disgusting to look at, which is a good thing in the Nurgle world. So yeah, the main goal was to make sure that it was airtight, so using the epoxy, I managed to do that, and I'm actually really happy with the result. So getting it airtight meant that I had to push the shell onto the body, and that was pretty simple. Once I got all the spaces filled up, I pretty much pushed it down onto the body, and then I sculpted some extra details. And the slug itself, if you look at the real model, has like 2 layers. It's got like the normal slug layer and the feet layer. So I made just pretty much a strip that went across the top of the legs on both sides of the model, and I pretty much like sculpted it in to look like it was a part of the original sculpt. And it looks really cool the way it came out. I'm actually really happy with it. And then I added in the pustules, like as always, pretty much just little balls, and I added them around, and they look really great. They're like little warts, and I'm always happy with how they turn out. They're always awesome. So I pretty much just stabbed holes and drew out lines and details just to make him look a little bit more alive. And finally came the teeth. Now I wasn't sure how I was going to do this, but I ended up just using a flat piece of warbler and cutting out the teeth. So the teeth are actually really misshapen and disgusting looking, really, but they're great, and I love them. They turned out really awesome. All I did was cut them out, and I could easily shape them, like I could bend them and push them in. And that was it. That was it. And after that, I added a tiny bit of detail around the mouth and around the head, and that was it. The model was done. All I had to do was let it set for a little bit, and I could paint it. Now when it came to painting this, I didn't want to paint the shell itself because I really liked the natural colors that were in it. So I hand painted black around the entire slug bit. And when it came time to the shell, I cleaned up any of the excess that I had on it, and I painted the entire guy in the traditional Nurgle colors, so an undercoat of the green and layers of lighter green. And eventually I ended up putting a Nurgle's rot all over the guy, and on the shell in particular really brought it out, and it almost finished the entire model. In the shell itself, I also added a little bit of green. I didn't want to remove too much of the initial color of the thing. I just wanted to add in just a tiny bit so it looked like it was moldy and gross. And I also added yellow on the teeth and on the legs and on those pustules. And yeah, that Nurgle rot really came out awesome. He looks really disgusting. The base I 3D printed, and I used my homemade mud, and I pretty much just stuck him into position. Like, he's not glued on traditionally. He's actually just stuck on thanks to the paint that I made, and it works really well. He's not going anywhere. He's been pushed into place. And yeah, I ended up just adding those little details, brought out the highlights, and added the rest of the Nurgle rot to look like he'd left a slimy trail behind, and he just looks so goddamn awesome. So I'm really happy with how he's turned out. I'm kind of thinking this is going to be a 2-part series, so if the second part is made, it'll be available right here. If it's there, you can watch it. There's going to be a guy sitting on the top, with a little fishing rod holding a little piece of food out the front, so it encourages him to move forward and also enables him to steer the actual creature. But I haven't made anything on top of him yet, and yeah, that'll come later on. But I'm really excited with how this came out, because I think I could make a bunch of these in a day if I really wanted to. This is definitely a one-day build. It only took a couple of hours to make, so if you have the resources and you really like the way this guy turned out, I highly advise you make them. You don't have to make them this big. Pretty much is defined by how big that shell is that you have. But yeah, he looks awesome, don't you reckon? He's pretty damn cool, and really easy to make if you have the resources, like I said. So if you like this video, don't forget to comment and subscribe, and definitely share it around. Maybe share it on those Reddit channels and all those channels that can bring up some views, because I would love to see people make this for themselves. If you feel like supporting me further on these videos, head over to Patreon and pledge a couple dollars per video. It really helps me out with supplies and whatnot, and it definitely inspires me to make more things for everyone. So thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this. See you guys.